First and foremost among these favors, which the Almighty hath conferred upon man, is the gift of understanding. His purpose in conferring such a gift is none other except to enable his creature to know and recognize the one true God, exalted be his glory. This gift giveth man the power to discern the truth in all things, leadeth him to that which is right, and helpeth him to discover the secrets of creation. Baha'u'llah. The essence of understanding is to testify to one's poverty and submit to the will of the Lord, the Sovereign, the Gracious, the All-Powerful. Baha'u'llah.
So this week, we're really happy to have Dr. Robert Stockman, and he'll be talking about the gift of understanding. Dr. Stockman obtained his master's degree and doctorate in religious studies from Harvard University, where he specialized in history of religion in the United States. He's the author of the Bahá'í Faith in America, Volumes 1 and 2, which cover Bahá'í events in the United States from 1892 to 1900 and 1901 to 1912, respectively. Thornton Chase, the First American Bahá'í, Abdu'l-Bahá in America, a volume that reviews Abdu'l-Bahá's 8-month journey across North America, The Bahá'í Faith, a Guide for the Perplexed, which is an introductory text, a book about the Bahá'í Faith and nonviolence, and various articles on Bahá'í history and theology. He also edited The World of the Bahá'í Faith, a 51-chapter survey of the faith published by Routledge. He was the director of the Wilmette Institute from 2000 to 2022 and has served on the boards of World Order magazine and the Bahá'í Encyclopedia project. He's an instructor of religious studies at Indiana University, South Bend. So with that, I'm happy to hand it off to Dr. Stockman.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paymane, for your warm welcome. And I very much appreciate the opportunity to see everyone today and to participate in a discussion with them about, I think, some very interesting and important ideas. This particular passage that Bayan read, that first passage, I think maybe I'll share screen real quick and just pop it up just so that people can look at it. And I'll leave it up perhaps for a little while. The passage that Bayan read, and I actually started with the first sentence of the paragraph, whereas he started with the second. Sometimes I don't use the first one too, but I think it's useful to look at that one as well. Know thou that according to what thy Lord, the Lord of all men, hath decreed in his book, the favors vouchsafed by him unto mankind have been and will ever remain limitless in their range. I presume this refers to this notion we have in the writings of Baha'u'llah that all created things reflect attributes of God, but in human beings, all the attributes of God are reflected. So this is part of our nature, that we can reflect potentially all the attributes of God. However, Baha'u'llah then goes on and say, first and foremost among these favors, which the Almighty hath conferred upon man, is the gift of understanding. His purpose in conferring such a gift is none other except to enable his creature to know and recognize the one true God. Exalted be his glory. This gift giveth man the power to discern the truth in all things, lead him to that which is right, and helpeth him to discover the secrets of creation. So there's a whole bunch of things about this particular passage that I think are absolutely fascinating, that are worth discussing and considering. First of all, if you want to try and understand what is the nature of human beings, who are we, what is our essence, you might say, certainly you want to talk about the fact that we reflect the divine attributes, but the thing that makes us different from the rest of creation around us is our rationality, our ability to think, our ability to understand. And the word there in Persian, by the way, is kherad, which has connotations of understanding and a few other things that are related to that. So this, it seems to me, is a statement about the essential nature of all human beings, that we, as a group, are given this gift of understanding. If you want to try and think about how to summarize human beings, that I think is a pretty powerful and a pretty important way of summarizing them. It's similar, I think, actually, you'll also see this in Aristotle and I think in Aquinas, where it's considered a gift of the Holy Spirit, understanding. So it doesn't exist only in the writings of Baha'u'llah. But I think it's very interesting if you contrast this notion, this understanding of the nature of human beings with, to take one example, the idea that human beings are originally sinful, that were fallen as a result of the eating of the forbidden fruit by Adam and Eve. And this, of course, is an essential understanding of the nature of human beings in scriptural Christianity, especially in Protestantism. I think Catholicism, it might nuance it a bit more, but many Protestants, at least not the conservative ones, wouldn't. And when you think about what implications does the gift of understanding on the one hand versus original sin on the other hand, what are the implications they have for understanding of what human beings are and how you treat them? And I'll just give you one example. In the 19th century, there was a liberal Protestant theologian named Horace Bushnell who was very concerned with developing an understanding of the education of children. And he was very concerned that people stop beating children, because the notion in American schools at the time was that since children have original sin, you have to beat the original sin out of them. So you can see how the notion of original sin shapes the way you treat kids in school. And the concept of all human beings as a group share the gift of understanding gives us a very different way of thinking about human beings. First of all, it doesn't make a distinction between races. And so you have right there in that concept of the gift of understanding, the equality of all people, racial equality, the equality of men and women is in that sense implied right there in that statement by Baha'u'llah about the gift of understanding. Now, of course, Baha'u'llah amplifies on this and specifically states equality of people in his writings. Abdu'l-Bahá, his son, explains about the importance of equality of the races and equality of the sexes. So we have this particular interpretation or understanding of the gift of understanding amplified also in the writings, but it's right there in this concept of the gift of understanding. And that to me is an extremely important insight into the nature of human beings and what you might call the ethical implications of that particular understanding of human beings. Anything we do involving other people is essentially ethical. And that's what I mean by the ethical implications. And you can go on and multiply this when you look at other principles of the faith. You can see that many of the basic teachings of the faith really reflect the notion of the gift of understanding in them. So for example, consultation, the notion that everyone can contribute to the understanding of a particular issue collectively, again, is based upon this understanding that everyone has the gift of understanding and everyone can contribute to it. The abolition of clergy is another teaching that flows from this as well. So you can see many of the Baha'i principles, I think, ultimately hinge on the gift of understanding. And if we're not completely sure what the gift of understanding's implications all are, the writings of the Baha'i Faith provide guardrails so that we don't go off in crazy directions in terms of understanding what it means. Even the Baha'i notion of elections without campaigning and nominating is a reflection of this idea of the gift of understanding, because it means that every individual, without being influenced by others, can make a rational and spiritual decision about who should be coordinating and organizing their community. So it really, I think, is fascinating, just that aspect of the gift of understanding. And there's several others. If we look a little farther down in the passage, the purpose of conferring such a gift is none other than to enable his creature to know and recognize the one true God. So here we have the concept that the gift of understanding is not just simply logic, it's not just rationality, it's also the ability to see and know and understand God. And here we're talking about, I think, two different words in Arabic and Persian. You know, there's the word ilm, which refers to sort of knowledge, organized sciences, not only modern sciences, but also the classical Islamic sciences were considered ilm as well. And then you also have marifat, the idea of inspired understanding and intuitive understanding. So the gift of understanding includes both sides of that. And in order to understand and know and recognize God, in a sense, you have to use both of them. So this gift of understanding is also a vehicle for us to approach and understand God. And then he goes on to say as well, it gives man the power to discern the truth in all things, leadeth him to that which is right, and helpeth him to discover the secrets of creation. So we have here the idea that even science, which is discovering the secrets of creation, is also part of this gift of understanding. And we have the implication that this gift can be used both to discern the spiritual and the material side of things. So that also implies that the divine side of the world and the material, natural side of the world are not in contradiction. So the harmony of science and religion, you could say, is even suggested right there in this particular passage, how this gift of understanding helps us not only to know God, but to know creation as well. And then I think it's also worth to notice this leadeth him to that which is right. And this resonates with the passage in the hidden words, that the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. And it goes on to say that by justice, you'll be able to see and understand things and understand what is right. So again, even the Baha'i notion of justice is reflected in this concept of the gift of understanding. Does this all make sense to people? I think it's kind of interesting when we see how all these things connect together. It's also notable that when Abdu'l-Bahá gave talks in the United States and Canada in 1912, he often listed sometimes 6 or 7, sometimes 8 or 9, sometimes 12, 13, 14 different principles of the faith. And he always started with 2. Which one was first tended to vary. But the 2 he always talked about was the independent investigation of truth and the oneness of humanity. So he would start with those 2 principles. Now, the independent investigation of truth, again, is the gift of understanding, because this is that gift that allows us to investigate. And he often starts with that one and then talks about the oneness of humanity. So I think for a long time I was puzzled by that. Why doesn't he put the oneness of humanity first? And the reason I think is because the oneness of humanity follows from the ability to do independent investigation of truth. So it's in that sense the more fundamental ability of human beings. So those are some of the implications that I've been fascinated to look at in these different in the different principles of the faith. Now, there's a whole other side of the Baha'i teachings that I think also is worth mentioning, and that's the emphasis on unity. Now, unity, I think you could say, also gets implied by the oneness of humanity, perhaps a little less obviously or directly. The fact that we all possess the gift of understanding, that we all occupy the same station, does imply the possibility that we can all get along and we can all work together. And it's really only in modern societies where there's, the severe tension of nations, raising up arms against each other. In many more smaller rural societies where there's certainly plenty of tensions, there's an awful lot more of emphasis on harmony, the idea that people have to work together in order to survive. And I think the faith recognizes this ancient understanding of human beings from the beginning of time, that cooperation is the thing that makes us possible to have a society. And so again, the gift of understanding is right there in this recognition of the need for people to cooperate, because they have to, especially where justice is concerned, they have to be able to recognize what is just and fair whenever they're cooperating together. And of course, Baha'u'llah himself elaborates on this and emphasizes that it's one of the purposes of religion to establish unity. So religion exists to help people acquire these attributes of God, like patience and compassion and love and the ability to listen and a sense of justice, so that we can work together with other human beings. And that, I think, also ultimately flows from this notion of the gift of understanding as well. So that's basically what I've been doing a lot of thinking about for the last couple of months, maybe a year or so. This gift of understanding passage has been a cause of a lot of meditation on my part, you might say. And the fact that I think we can find a large fraction of the teachings of the faith right here shows us the unity of the teachings of the faith as well, and how they reinforce each other and provide a kind of coherent whole for us to understand human beings and the goal of humanity and the purpose to which we're moving in the future. So that's a little bit of a short talk, and I hope it's useful. I'll stop sharing my screen and see whether people have other comments and questions about it.
People can put their, questions or any comments in the chat, and we can address them.
Also an example of a statement by the Guardian, how sometimes teachings of the faith appear to be in contradiction, but they're actually maybe at opposite poles of a sphere, with the spherical surface of the sphere connecting them together. And we often see that, I think, in understanding many of the Baha'i teachings.
First question is how to use the gift of understanding in knowing oneself.
Yes, obviously. Knowing yourself is this lifelong, well, perhaps I shouldn't say lifelong, because it's this world and the next. It's an eternal struggle that we're all engaged in. And the gift of understanding, obviously reflected on ourselves, helps us to understand ourselves. And that is both the spiritual and the intellectual. Again, it's connected with prayer, obviously, as well. But I think that's clearly part of it, yeah.
Comment that our level of understanding and station are not equal.
Yes, that's certainly true. I mean, you have people born with, say, only half a brain, and they're therefore very limited in what they can understand. But they've nevertheless been given that station of humanity, the ability to reflect all the attributes of God, and that means the attribute of understanding is something that they can reflect in their own unique way. Perhaps not the same as somebody else, but in their own way they can reflect it. So we have a station of all being human beings, and that station is the same. But within that station, all of us progress at different rates at different times. And that's obviously an important difference amongst us. I'm actually going to try and write this up as some sort of paper. I've used this a little bit in a talk I gave at Stanford University in early June about Abdu'l-Bahá's visits to the universities, because what I just described in many ways summarizes the kind of thing he was saying at many of the universities, with different variants depending on the particular school that he was going to, of course. But I think there's a very interesting way of understanding Baha'i ethics through this particular passage. And when I say ethics, remember, I'm talking about human behavior, how we behave around each other. So it's ethics in that very broad sense of the implications of the oneness of humanity and how we deal with each other.
There's a question. What do you understand about Abdu'l-Bahá saying in the future meat will not be eaten? Because of the increased awareness of the health and planetary benefits of a vegetarian, vegan diet and the cruelty to animals of the meat production, do you think this process has begun?
Well, I think clearly it has begun in the sense that more and more people are sensitive to exactly the issues that you just mentioned. And more people are both either vegetarian or vegan. So there is a movement in that sense. Abdu'l-Bahá didn't identify all those various issues that you mentioned in his own writings. I think he probably identified the issue of cruelty, and he also identified the nature of the teeth human beings have to indicate that we're not normally meat eaters, which is also true. But I think we do have this movement towards getting away from meat, yeah. But Baha'u'llah, fortunately, never, and Abdu'l-Bahá never actually forbade it. So it'll be a process. More about what he said in the universities and what is Baha'i ethics. Well, Baha'i ethics is an interesting question, and what he said about universities are sort of two different questions. Ethics, of course, generally is the of right and wrong. You know, what is correct behavior, what is sinful, or what is illegal, would be other ways of looking at, you know, things that are unethical. Baha'i ethics would be the ethics of the way Baha'is would look at the world and behave in the world based on the teachings of Baha'u'llah. So Baha'i ethics has certain unique characteristics that you will find eventually in one place or another in many of the other religious traditions and philosophies, but not in the particular combination that you'll find in the faith. I think probably the best example of that is the Baha'i concept of voting, where Shoghi Effendi, the grandson of Abdu'l-Bahá and head of the faith from 1921 to 57, even said that people have a human right to decide who they were going to vote for without anybody influencing them. Now, we don't normally think of that as a human right, the independent right of us to choose who we're going to vote for without other people telling us vote for this person or vote for that person. That's a very interesting position that the head of the faith has taken that I don't know if I've seen anywhere else in any other ideology or religion. And you can multiply that in many other places. The statement that if you have to choose between educating a boy child or a girl child because you don't have the resources, you should educate the girl child first. That's I think, pretty unique ethical position of the faith as well, because the girl will be the ultimate educator of the next generation, and therefore will be in a better position to raise up the next generation. And there's a lot of evidence now in the development field about the importance of exactly that, the education of women. So that's sort of what Baha'i ethics is all about. And there are various people who are beginning to study it and write about it. Udo Schäfer, who was a German Baha'i, has written 2 very big, fat volumes on Baha'i ethics that were translated from German into English a few years ago. As for the universities, Abdu'l-Bahá spoke in the United States to 4 university audiences. Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts, Howard University in Washington, D.C., Columbia University in New York, and Stanford University in California. He also spoke at Northwestern, but he was speaking to the Theosophists, not to a university audience. And there, he generally emphasized very strongly rationality and science, and the importance of those things in human development. And he talked very strongly about the oneness of humanity. And at the Howard University talk, that was the main focus, of course, was the oneness of humanity. And at the other universities, he almost always closed with a very strong plea about the importance of establishing world peace. And 6 times while Abdu'l-Bahá was in North America, he said that there was going to be a war in Europe soon. 6 times. So he was aware of this, and when he didn't actually come out and say that in his talks, he emphasized the importance of doing something about maintaining world peace. And then after the war, he said, you know, I warned them, and they didn't listen. He actually says that in a tablet as well. So it's really very interesting to see, in the context of the times, what Abdu'l-Bahá was trying to tell people. And you can see why he had the volume named The Promulgation of Universal Peace about his talks in North America.
Thank you. Okay, I think that's all of our questions. Thank you. This was a really great talk, and we look forward to you putting this all in writing as well so we can digest it later. Thank you so much.
Good. Thank you.
So our speaker next week will be Dr. Drew Ramagnanti, and he'll be talking about the profit motive in healthcare. Can religion help? So again, these are every Saturday at noon Eastern time, and I'll put the link to our YouTube channel and mailing list in the chat. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Bye.